Welcome to the Mischief Maker broadcast, where chaos, creativity, and common sense collide. Your host, Joel Freeman, was kicked out of high school in Alberta, Canada. He left home at 17 and hitchhiked around North America as a long-haired hippie and dope-smoking fool. He made a 180-degree change, becoming one of the first chaplains in the history of the NBA. As a professional speaker, Joel has traveled to well over 55 countries. His many books have been published in 28 foreign translations. Pieces from his Black History collection have been seen by millions at the United Nations and many other venues. And now, the Chief Mischief Maker himself, Dr. Joel A. Freeman.
Hey guys, Baby Joel here. I'm here to brighten your day. Hey, what does a 300-pound canary say? Here, kitty, kitty. It's so good to be here. And we have such an incredible show for you tonight. I have a dear friend by the name of Dan Sexton, who is going to be on with us this evening. Known him for, goodness, probably 7-8 years now. And hang in there, because you are going to be seeing some things and learning some things about archaeology, the Bible narrative, how the two connect and interconnect. And one of the things about Dan is he has spent years studying and bringing together the archaeological sites of the Holy Land in Israel, and then bringing it together into the biblical narrative. It's going to be fascinating for you. Now, this is a politics-free zone. The politics, for instance, of Israel, I can't figure it out. The Likud part, all these different issues that go on and swirl in and around that region of the world. We're just going to take that and kind of park it over here. That might be for another show, who knows, or for somebody else probably, because this is a politics-free zone. But we're going to focus specifically on the spade of archaeology. And we're going to take a look at how these different sites connect, not just with a intellectual understanding, but also how it connects with you and me, with us, as we begin to try to figure out how all of this comes together. So tonight, the Mischief Maker Show, you have the term Mischief Maker. A lot of people say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean you're a troublemaker? Well, maybe to some, I don't know. It's all about asking the tough questions, being willing to be asked the tough questions. It's all about having a curiosity-driven life where we're just kind of looking around the corner. How is this tough situation going to work out? How is this joy? How long is this joy going to last? Being willing to ask the why questions, or what if? What if this was not a barrier, or that wasn't a barrier? And also to begin to look at what goes on in our lives, how we interconnect with other people, and some of the rough edges, and some of the problem-solving skills, the solution, becoming a solutionist. That's the whole idea behind a mischief maker. In fact, you maybe didn't realize you're a mischief maker. I'm hoping that tonight you'll be taken from A to A+ in some aspects or elements of your life as a mischief maker. So hang in there with this show. And right now we're going to go to a song that I wrote. It's called In Praise of Limping. What's that all about?
Jacob was a fighter, but he fought to deceive. A man of ambition with tricks up his sleeve. He stole Esau's birthright, played the game of control. Jake's life was broke and God reached for his soul. By the river they wrestled till dawn's early light. Left with a limp, somehow got it right. Get the big head fall flat on your face. Walk with a limp, it's the mark of God's grace. Think you're a big deal, you're just starting to fall. But a limp is the mark of surrendering all. Saw the man chasing dreams that he had designed, built his kingdom, left meekness behind. The walls came down and his plans fell apart. He lost what he built, but then he got smart. As the years clicked by, he had a scar to remind that God does his best work when pride has died. Get the big head fall flat on your face. Walk with a limp, it's the mark of God's grace. Think you're a big deal, you're just starting to fall. But a limp is the mark of surrendering all. She was a woman who carried the weight of loss and betrayal, a cruel twist of fate. Her dreams were shattered, her heart torn in two, but in her surrender, God made her brand new. She now limps with a purpose on earthbound streets. Her once empty canvas is a masterpiece. The world says the strong are the ones who will rise, but God lifts the lowly, confounds the wise. It's upside down, who gets the prize? The broken rise up where pride is despised. He chooses the broken, the weary, the small, to show that his strength is above it all. So if you're limping today, don't be ashamed. It's a sign that God's love has rewritten your name. Remember this when life takes its toll. A bad day for your ego is a good day for your soul.
Your ego is a good day for your soul. What does that mean? Well, it's all about the whole plan of, I guess, what happens in our lives. Maybe we're talking to people in Japan, Australia, China, all different, Canada, India, UK, across the United States, and maybe you're limping right now. And I just hope that song connects in some way. It's all about Jacob. And Jacob was a man who his name was changed to Israel. And that's kind of an interesting twist there, because he had a wrestling match with an angel. Many believe that it was in what they call a Christophany, an Old Testament appearance of Jesus. And, that's debatable. Maybe some people think differently than that, but it's an interesting thing to consider that Jacob was touched in the hollow of his thigh, in his strength, his area of strength in his physical body. And for the rest of his life, he limped. And that's, I guess, kind of a metaphor for all of us. When we're young and foolish and kind of running all around, ricocheting off the walls and doing this and that, in our own production of what we consider to be success. I think sometimes we have to come to a place where we are touched in the area of strength, and limping occurs. And that's what I look for in people. I look for a limp. And you know what? I've seen a limp, a kind of a limp in Dan. And it's a wonderful thing to just see and to understand about another human being, not allowing things to get to his head, a man of great wisdom and understanding. And Dan Sexton, come on with us. Mel, bring Dan in to the show. And Dan is someone that I hope you really are tuned in. Get out your pen, paper, pad, and take some notes, because we're going to talk about some of the most important archaeological sites in Israel. And tonight, I tell you, it's one of the most difficult situations trying to figure that out. Isn't that right, Dan?
It sure is, Joel. Thanks for having me on. We had a conversation earlier today where you had asked me to come up with 10 sites in Israel and kind of the top 10 list. And it's just impossible. It's impossible to come up with 10. I can't even come up with 10 just in one region of Israel. But we'll do our best tonight to try to hit the high points and the top 10 of the archaeological sites in Israel. But there's just so much to see there. The whole land, in a sense, is an archaeological site because so much of biblical history took place there. So just about everywhere you go in the land, there's something happened that is recorded in the Bible. So it really is difficult to narrow it down to a short list.
This might demand another show where we do another top 10 or secondary 10 tier of, right. of places. But give us a kind of a quick backdrop into what caused you to become interested in Israel, archaeology, the Bible, and the narratives that come from that.
Yeah, I became a Christian when I was in my mid-20s, about 26 years old. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. We didn't go to church or anything like that. And I became a Christian in my mid-20s and started reading the Bible, studying the Bible, and just became very interested in the Bible. And for me, really what happened is I had a friend who got an inheritance from an aunt who had passed away. And he said to me, "Hey, do you want to go to Israel?" He also had an interest in the Bible. He was also a Christian. We went to church together, and I remember him saying to me, like, "Hey, I got this check from an aunt that died that he didn't even know." And he said, what if we go to Israel? So he and his wife and myself and my wife, we went to Israel. Like I said, I was in my 20s, and we went on this tour, and it just blew our minds to be there and to see the Bible come to life and come off the page in a way that you just don't recover from it. It's really like going from black and white to color, and seeing and understanding the Bible in a deeper way. And so after that trip, I wanted to go back, and it just compelled me even more to dig into the Bible and start looking at archaeology and the different biblical sites that are in the land of Israel and how they all tie together, and how the archaeology in Israel helps to validate the things that we read in the Bible. And it just deepens your faith in the Bible and your understanding of the Bible.
I know you have taught through the entire Bible, and for some, maybe they're more interested in the Old Testament, some are more interested in the New Testament, but you've been from the very beginning to the very end, teaching it word by word, line by line, verse by verse. What is that experience like? I mean, there are many people, perhaps even watching us tonight, that or whenever they're watching this, that have never even hardly opened the Bible. What is that experience for you? I think you're on mute. Dan, are you on mute? Go ahead. Go ahead, Dan. What was that experience for you? Experiencing some kind of a technical situation. Dan, and then we'll try that. What has happened is that I know for me personally is that I have my wife and I have led at least 25 tours of Israel and Greece, and I know Dan has led a number of tours throughout that region of the world. And so what has happened is that we have put together a list of different cities, different sites, different digs that would be of great interest to you as viewers tonight or today. Now, what we want to do is take a look at the different places where we've had archaeologists have gone in. I know that there's a gentleman. Are you there, Dan?
I'm back.
Okay. We'll edit this out, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah. So, Joel, what was your question? I could see you. I couldn't hear you.
Okay.
Though, but,
the question was, you have actually gone through the entire Bible from the very beginning to the very end in teaching this verse by verse. There's many people maybe in our audience who haven't even hardly opened the Bible. What is that like to not just read, but then to study it, to communicate this with other people?
Right. Yeah. So I think that obviously, if you study something to teach it to others, it becomes part of you. You just gain such a deeper knowledge from studying and teaching it to others. I've heard it said that we teach only 20% of what we've studied. So that other 80% is kind of for you, to just ingest and to make it part of you. So you just gain a deeper understanding of the Word of God. And by teaching through the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation, you also gain the meta narrative of the Bible, and you start to see the connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the New Testament and the Old Testament. And you see these threads that run through both the Old Testament and the New Testament. So it's so beneficial to study it that way, to kind of go systematically through the book from beginning to end, because then you understand the overarching narrative and the overarching events that are taking place and how they're all interconnected. The Bible is an integrated book from Genesis to Revelation. I think a lot of times when people study the Bible, they take it in bits and pieces and kind of jump around from one book to another book or one passage to another passage. And it doesn't have any continuity to it. It doesn't have any unity to it. It's a lot of disconnected concepts and ideas or disconnected teachings. But then when you go through it systematically from beginning to end, you get the picture. I think really the way it was intended to be understood. It's a progressive narrative. It's a progressive revelation. It starts and it has a beginning, has a middle, and has an end to it, just like any other book. So I think it's super beneficial to study the Bible in that way.
Yeah, I think even some of the Old Testament narratives, for instance, like about Jacob, for instance, hitchhiking off that song, is if someone starts in the middle or toward the end, it's like going to a movie halfway through and not getting the subtext, the character development, and all the rest. And I just think that, beginning in the very beginning and working through as you have done is a wonderful situation that you've experienced, but then have shared with others. And I've learned so much when I've heard you speak on these topics.
Joel, the New Testament begins with the open chapter of Gospel traces genealogy, which people just that reading, but it traces the genealogy to King David, and back. And so from the opening, clear, you're in the middle of the story. There's David and an word that connects to the.
Hey, Dan, I think you're going to have to come back on because your voice is breaking up, and it's you might have to redo, and I'll do a little bit of shuffling around here until you get back on. Okay, one of the things about going to Israel is that when you start seeing some of these things, in fact, it took me about 5 trips to Israel to really begin to understand. Once again, not about politics, but about what was going on in the region. For instance, in Jerusalem, you're about maybe 9 to 15 feet above where 2,000 years ago was happening, because each successive civilization that came into Jerusalem built on it and took stones and all kinds of other things to build new civilizations on top. And there are just some places, a few places you can go to. You can say, wow, this is the original. This is where it happened. In fact, on Herod's, the Dome of the Rock, and that whole area, that was a threshing floor. That's the King of David actually bought that just above the city of David. And from that particular area, that now we have what's known as the Temple Mount. And Herod then built this huge platform and then put the temple. The temple was built. Of course, it wasn't Solomon's temple. It was Herod's temple. Prior to that, of course, Solomon's temple had been destroyed under the Babylonian system, and the nation of Israel was taken to Babylon for 70 years. And according to Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11, they were there for that 70 years. And then Jeremiah or Daniel read what Jeremiah had prophesied. And that's when he began to pray, and all kinds of new things began to happen. And then we have Ezra rebuilding the temple. We have Nehemiah coming and rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. And all of these things developing at that particular time, I think, is a very compelling part of the whole story of Israel. When you go up north, it is a totally different kind of a pastoral feel in the north of Israel. When you come south and you go to the Dead Sea region, and you begin to realize in the Dead Sea, what happened down there. There's at least probably 2, maybe 3 sites that we could point to that might be like Sodom and Gomorrah in that particular region. You have Abraham's well, you have Jacob's well, you have all these different things where Joseph's body was brought back from Egypt. And then in a place in Shechem, they put his body. My oldest son and I have actually been to that site where his body, his bones, the remains are there in Shechem. And so it's just a very fascinating place. In Qumran, going to Masada, there's nothing biblical about Masada, but then you get to En-Gedi, and that's where David and his, was hiding when Saul was trying to kill him. And it's just fascinating to go in these narrow regions, and you can see from a military standpoint how when David was there with his soldiers, his 300 men, and they're in caves. Now, with Saul's army, it doesn't matter how big. He could have thousands of men coming after David, but they could only go through 1 or 2 at a time. And so from a military strategic standpoint, David is in this spot, and he is, he can actually take the army one by one as they're coming through if he wanted to. And so it becomes a thing where it all comes clear. There's actually 2 waterfalls in En-Gedi when you walk through these narrow areas and get to the first waterfall, and then come up to the next waterfall, and then you come all the way around. Just a fascinating area. And then, of course, when you look at David fighting Goliath, and he comes to the place in the Valley of Elah, that's about 15 miles. You look at Bethlehem from Jerusalem, It's about 5 or 6 miles away from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. You look at the Valley of Hinnom, the garbage, perpetual burning. That's what that means. And then the Kidron Valley, and then the Mount of Olives. And all of that, it is such a small, compressed area. The topography is unbelievable, the high areas of Israel. And then you come down to the lowland, which the Shephelah is, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, but that's the area that's kind of beneath, just between the high rocky areas and then the low areas where the Philistines lived at one point. And that's why when the Philistines said to the Israelites, said, you have a God of the hills, not of the valley. In other words, taunting them. Come on down, fight. We've got these chariots. We have all these swords and everything. We have smiths that can do all this work. And you're up there with your stones and staffs, and you've got the military advantage because you're high up and we're down low. It becomes a situation where a very difficult situation for people to try to figure out and to try to make sense of as they're looking at that from the biblical perspective. You read the story, then you see with your own eyes these areas. It's just a fascinating thing to consider. And then you get up north and you get around Galilee. I've been on the Sea of Galilee when a storm comes up, and then you start reading about a storm coming up and Jesus walking on the water and all these different things. And you can see, wow, this just the way the wind, the currents come in and how quickly the weather can change and how fascinating that is. You get to Capernaum and you see places in Capernaum, the ancient synagogue. You see a place where they have proven beyond it's proven this is where Peter lived. This is where his family lived. And you have this small little place. Actually a kind of a church has been built over it. I call it the spaceship, if you've seen pictures of it or if you visited. And it's just a fascinating thing to consider how all of these things come together in a way that is where we have a situation where you're reading the narrative and then you're experiencing what is happening. We go on down to the place where David was in the city of David. And that was, I know a dear friend of mine, you'll probably see this, is Eli Shakron, who was the chief archaeologist of the city of David for 20 years. And I can remember the first time that I had met him, and he pulled out his keys and he went to this place down deep in the bowels of the city of David, a place where it was still a dig. And there you see a stone that's about maybe 16, 17 inches long, maybe 2 inches thick, and about maybe 9 or 10 inches tall. And he calls it the Holy of Holies. He calls this the first temple, maybe even Melchizedek's temple that's talked about, this mythic character talked about in the book of Genesis. And so all of this begins to come together. You see in that particular area that he showed us with in the city of David, there is a place to actually tie up small animals like a sheep or a goat, that it's actually brought into the wall. And so all of this is just so fascinating. We have Dan back. Can we hear you?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I've just been trying to give kind of an overview at 30,000 feet until you were able to work out the audio situation. Yeah. But let's start with the very first area. Let me kind of bring my ship in for a landing and my airplane and get back to your airplane. What is the first place you want us to visit verbally? Give us some verbal snapshots.
So, Joel, before I do that, I do want to add one little thing to what you've been saying is what the archaeology shows in visiting these sites. It shows you that the Bible's about real people and real events that really happen in real places. That is what is so amazing about it, just as you were describing these places, that it's all real, it's all true, it's all historical. So places, I kind of was thinking starting up in the very north. One of the places that I think would be on my top 10 would be Caesarea. It's way up in the northern part of Israel. And this is where Jesus took his disciples, and this is where he asked his disciples, who do men say that I am? And the disciples threw out a couple things that people were saying about Jesus. Some say you're a prophet, some say you're Jeremiah, some say you're John the Baptist back from the dead. But then Jesus asked, who do you say that I am? And Peter said, well, you're the Christ, you're the Son of the living God. And that takes place at a place called Caesarea Philippi. It's also significant because that is the first place that Jesus told his disciples that he would be crucified and buried and resurrected. So that is the first time he introduces that to them, the mission for why he came to the earth, to die and to be buried and to rise again. So it's a very special place. And one of the things too that is just like an added feature is it's absolutely beautiful up in that part of Israel. Those areas that you go to up there, they're all part of like the national park system of Israel. So it's a beautiful nature preserve in that area. There's mountains there, there's streams there. So there's also just this beautiful hike that you do to get to some of those biblical sites out in just this beautiful environment, in addition to seeing the archaeology. So it has many layers to it when you visit there and you go to these different sites. So I would start with Caesarea.
Dan,
also
Dan, if we
area.
could,
yeah.
We have someone who has written a question, Mohammed Sicer. Thank you, Mohammed, for listening and watching tonight. And your question, where is the actual evidence sequentially for the biblical narrative? How would you respond to that?
Joel, what do you think he means by that question?
I think he's, let's see, where is the actual evidence? I think if we looked at the manuscripts, the archaeological discoveries, and all those, I think that there's some sequential.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, the Bible is written before there's a printing press, so it's copied by hand. And so with ancient writing that was written before the printing press, you have to look at handwritten copies. And for the New Testament, there's well over 5,000 copies of the New Testament that we have. With the Old Testament, there's well over 20 or 25,000 copies of the New Testament that were copied by hand. By comparison, other ancient writings in some cases may have a few hundred. With some of the ancient writings, there's maybe 2 or 3 copies of it, maybe 8 copies of it. And in addition to the mountain of manuscript evidence that we have for the New Testament and the Old Testament, the date of those writings in some cases date back to less than 100 years when it was written, which is just phenomenal. Like the manuscript evidence for the Bible is just unbelievable and unmatched compared to other ancient writings. In many cases, ancient writings that we take as true or truly written by the author that it's attributed to, we may have just a handful of manuscripts, and those manuscripts date sometimes 1,000 years after it was actually written. So there's a 1,000-year gap, for example, between when it was written and the oldest manuscript that we have. Again, with the Bible, with the New Testament, we have some manuscripts that date to less than 100 years from when the New Testament was written. So just overwhelming evidence for the Bible and the manuscript evidence and the closeness and.
Okay, and also there's Muhammad comes back with another question here. Muhammad, thank you. I mean, not just historical places, but the sequence of events. I guess just in terms of, first comes, Jacob, Isaac, all the different sequence of historical figures and stories.
Yeah. So the Bible has what's called a progressive revelation, and what that means is the 66 books of the Bible, Old and New Testament, were not all given at once. They were revealed over the course of roughly 1,500 years. As these things are unfolding historically, these books are being written. So we have a sequence just really based on that.
Muhammad is another question, and it is: the Old Testament was written in ancient Aramaic and then translated into Greek and then into English, and not really reliable. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So actually, Muhammad, that's not correct. Testament was through some pieces of were written in Aramaic, but it was in Hebrew, translated into Greek, and about what called the Jewish. And we have, the 16th century was the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in a place called Qumran. And some of those Dead Sea Scrolls predate the time of Jesus. So, we're talking about 2nd century BC, 3rd century BC. And you can take the Dead Sea Scrolls and you can put them by the copies of the Bible that we have today, and you can see that they're the same, that they are reliable. There's a place in Jerusalem that is part of the Israel Museum called the Shrine of the Book, where many of the Dead Sea Scrolls are housed. And you can get, for example, they have the whole scroll of Isaiah that was discovered as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can take just a Hebrew Bible and open it to Isaiah, and you can hold it up against the glass next to the scroll of Isaiah. And even if you can't read Hebrew, you can see that it is exactly the same. So the evidence for the Old Testament, Dead Sea Scrolls, verify the Old Testament that we have. I think they found a portion of every book of the Old Testament, except for the book of Esther, I believe, as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are just overwhelming evidence for the accuracy of the Bible that we have today.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. We seem to be having, here we are now, back again. I guess the whole idea here is with the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's dated, as you mentioned, 90 to 100 years before the time of Christ. And Muhammad, it's the whole, when scribes were putting together the scriptures, they had to, when they got done, they had to count from the beginning to the middle and the end to the middle, the words. And if it didn't match the original, they would just throw it in the fire, their copy. And so they're very, very strict ways of putting this together. So it isn't just playing telephone where I say something and then the next person says something else, and by 18, 20 people, it's different. There was a very strict process for putting all of this together. But and thank you, Muhammad, for your questions, your comments. What's the next place, Dan, that you would recommend for someone who is interested?
Tel Dan is up there in the north. That's a great site to go to. Again, it's in a nature preserve, so there's a hike that's involved in going to visit the site there. Some of the things that are significant about Tel Dan is King Jeroboam in the Old Testament. He established Dan and Bethel as two worship sites for the worship of the golden calf. And he really nationalized idolatry for Israel. And it affected the nation and ultimately led to the captivity of the northern kingdom of Israel into the Assyrian Empire. There was also an inscription found there that mentions the house of David. So it is archaeological evidence for King David and his lineage that is mentioned in the Bible. And so again, we have evidence outside of the Bible that refers to a character, a significant character in the Bible, again, helping to validate what the Bible actually says. There's also an amazing gate there that's known as Abraham's Gate. It's a gate that dates back to the time of Abraham, and very well may have been the gate that Abraham used to enter the city there when he traveled up to that area to rescue his nephew Lot from that area. So Dan is beautiful. It's a great place to visit. There's an amazing city gate there for the city of Dan, so you can see what a city gate looked like. Moving down into the Galilee, of course, Capernaum would be at the top of that list. Capernaum is where Jesus lived. After he left Nazareth, he moved to Capernaum, and many scholars think that he lived in Peter's house with Peter there. So you mentioned Peter's house earlier. Jesus may have lived in that house as well. But so much of Jesus's ministry took place in Capernaum, in the city of Capernaum, in addition to living there. The synagogue is there. There's a 4th century synagogue that is built on top of the foundation of the 1st century synagogue that Jesus actually taught in. So you can see the foundation stones of the synagogue that Jesus taught in. From Capernaum, Chorazin, I think, is another place to go to. Chorazin, Jesus talked about Capernaum, Chorazin, and Bethsaida. That's known as the evangelical triangle because that was kind of ground zero of Jesus's ministry there in the Galilee. And what the listeners may not realize is, 85 to 90% of what you read in the Gospels about the ministry of Jesus Christ really takes place in that little region, kind of that one quadrant of the Sea of Galilee area, an area that is only from one end to the other end. That section is maybe about 5 to 7 miles. And 90% of what you read in the Gospels takes place in that little stretch of land. So Chorazin's great. Chorazin, you have a synagogue that's there, a synagogue that has a Moses seat in it. Although the last time I was there in 2023, they had moved the Moses seat out and it now sits outside of the synagogue. But Jesus mentions, the religious leaders like to sit in Moses's seat, Jesus said. So you can see an example of a Moses seat there. There's also a wine press there that you can see. There's also a mill for milling grain that's there. Jesus talked about two women will be at the mill, one will be taken. You can see an actual mill there that required 2 people to operate. There's just many other things too that you can see there, but it's a place that Jesus ministered. There's some houses that are there that are, date back to the 2nd or 3rd century that have tiled roofs that you can see. So it really gives you an idea of what the town looked like in the time of Jesus Christ. From there, I would also include the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount. Just a breathtaking view overlooking the Sea of Galilee. That's a great place to go to and to study through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5 to 7. And you can sit there. There's a big Catholic church there that has, gardens and places where you can sit and overlook the Sea of Galilee as you study the Sermon on the Mount. On the other side of the Sea of Galilee, there's Bethsaida, which there's a new Bethsaida that archaeologists are excavating right now. And it's great to take groups there and to visit that location because it's an active archaeological site. And you can see the archaeologists actually doing the work of excavating a city that is mentioned in the Bible, and seeing that work being done of bringing that city, into the light for people to visit. And when, I took go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say,
go ahead.
I was going to say, we're going to take a little break here, and I want to hear that story what you're just about to share about on the other side. So, Mel, if we could take a break for about 90 seconds. Okay, I guess David and Goliath. It's hard to find anyone who hasn't heard about this epic drama. And we all can relate to being in a position of powerlessness, a time in each of our lives when everything looks dark, until something out of the ordinary happens. Guess what? The David and Goliath story is not a fantasy. It actually happened right here in Israel. In fact, here is the stream bed, the Wadi, where David picked up the 5 smooth stones. And here is the Valley of Elah. Experts aren't sure about the exact spot where David killed Goliath, but it is proven to be the actual valley where it happened. And I am now standing on the hill where experts believe the Israelite army camped. Off in the distance, you can see Tel Azekah, where the Philistine army camped. And somewhere in the middle, David killed the giant. Hi, I'm Joel Freeman, and I lead 5-star rated, all-inclusive and educational tours to Israel. You can come to Israel with the Freeman Institute tours to experience the Valley of Elah and to pick up your own 5 smooth stones. Check out the website, then call me. Ask me for the 3 reasons why our tours of Israel are different from the rest. So that's the Valley of Elah. I wanted to give you, as viewers, a little view of that. And Dan, you had something you wanted to share.
The last went to this when we went there.
Dan, you're breaking up again. I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening. Oh my goodness. So as Dan comes back in, the Valley of Elah, that is when you go there and you see the Wadi with stones in it. I don't know if they put stones in there all the time, but I know that every tour we've gone, we've picked up stones. So Dan, you're back. You had a story you were telling. I apologize for that.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Hopefully the audio is good. So we went to the site of Bethsaida. You have to turn off the main road and start going down this pothole-filled dirt road. And our bus driver got our bus, as far down the road as he could get it. And he said, "This is as far as I can go. There's just too many potholes." So we get off the bus and we're walking the rest of the way down this dirt road. And on each side of the dirt road, there's landmines out in the field. So you have to stay on the dirt road to get out to this location. And then once we got out there, there was barbed wire that we had to climb over to get into the site. And then once you get there, it's an incredible site to go to. In fact, I was talking to a person that was on the trip with us in 2023 just today, and she was saying how that was her favorite stop. But part of what made it so exciting was the adventure, of hiking down the dirt road and staying out of the landmine area and climbing over the barbed wire. Like our group enjoyed kind of the thrill of all of that, and then seeing the site. So you also get, just kind of a little bit of an adventure there too, as you go to some of these sites as well.
So what other sites, especially in the South, you're looking at? And maybe are there any sites that include maybe some Old Testament characters?
Yeah. You'd mentioned the Elah Valley, or also going to Bethlehem. You can go out to the shepherd's field where David watched his sheep. David was a shepherd and watched his father's sheep. Even when Samuel came to anoint David to be the next king of Israel, he was out taking care of his father's sheep. So there's Bethlehem. If you go farther south down into the Negev, the desert, you've got Beersheba, which is where Abraham was there, Jacob. You have the well that is mentioned in the book of Genesis is there at Beersheba. Even farther down, you have Arad, which is mentioned in the Exodus narrative in the Old Testament. The children of Israel were attacked by the king of Arad, and you can go to the ruins of the city of Arad. So there's several places down in the desert area that you can go to. That's just a few of the better known ones that you can go to, but there's a lot down there as well. I know of tours that just go and do the southern part and do all Old Testament sites down there.
So take us to Jerusalem now on some of the sites that are exciting to you.
Yeah, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a must-see. That is the place of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's a place to see. The Mount of Olives, so much of Jesus's ministry, his teaching, his Olivet Discourse, which is the second longest teaching recorded in the Gospels, took place on the Mount of Olives. The Garden of Gethsemane is on the Mount of Olives, where Jesus was prayed the night of his arrest and where he was arrested. The triumphal entry, Jesus comes down the Mount of Olives on a donkey to enter Jerusalem. It's the only time in his ministry that he presented himself as king, the King of Israel. And so that also takes place on the Mount of Olives. He ascends back to heaven from the Mount of Olives as well. So there's a lot that you can look at in the Gospels there on the Mount of Olives. That's another place I would go to. The Temple Mount. There's something called the Jerusalem Archaeological Park that is kind of around the base of the Temple Mount. There's the southern steps there, which are the steps that date back to Herod's temple that you mentioned earlier. And that was the main entrance into the temple. So there's no doubt that Jesus walked those steps to go into the temple numerous times. Going in and out of the temple, he would have used those southern steps, that southern entrance.
Talk about the uniqueness of those steps.
Yeah, so the steps, the treads, the width of the treads of the steps are different widths. They're not uniform, so that you can't just kind of mindlessly run up the steps into the temple. You have to pay attention and you have to walk carefully and deliberately because they're not equal widths. And it's by design that way. It forces you to come into the temple and into the presence of God who dwelt in the temple in Jerusalem. It forces you to come into the temple deliberately and cautiously and thoughtfully and circumspectly as you're walking in. So by design, you have to slow down and you have to walk carefully. There's even a verse in Ecclesiastes, I think Ecclesiastes, maybe chapter 5, that talks about walking thoughtfully when you come into the presence of God. And so the steps required you to do that, to navigate those steps.
What other sites are of interest in that region?
Yeah, so there's the City of David, which you mentioned earlier. The City of David has Hezekiah's Tunnel, which is always fun to do with a group, to go through an Old Testament tunnel that still has water flowing through it from the Pool of Siloam, from the Gihon Springs to the Pool of Siloam. So there's water rushing through it. It's this very narrow tunnel that you have to use a flashlight to go through, that was carved by hand to bring water into the city, within the walls of the city. In the City of David, you also have the Pool of Siloam, which is mentioned in the New Testament. There's the account of Jesus healing the blind man, and the man has to walk down the steps to the Pool of Siloam and wash his eyes, and his sight is restored once he does that. The Pool of Siloam is being excavated right now, and archaeologists intend to expose the whole Pool of Siloam. So as groups or visitors go to that pool in the coming years, the whole thing will be exposed and opened as it was in the time of Jesus. And then they've also excavated the steps that go from the Pool of Siloam back up to the Temple Mount. And so you can walk up those steps, but they're under the city. So you're underground, and all of those steps that were there in the time of Jesus, you can walk all the way up them to the Temple Mount. It's really, really incredible to see and experience, knowing that these are the steps that Jewish pilgrims who came to Jerusalem would use these steps to do, a ceremonial cleansing before going up to the temple. These are the steps that the blind man walked down to wash his eyes, to be healed of his blindness by Jesus. You're walking those same steps, and it's just an incredible experience to see those things there and to experience them and to touch them. Like, again, you go from black and white to color TV kind of thing, where it's physical. Before, when you're reading the Bible, it's words on a page and they can really impact you, but now there's like a physical, tangible experience to it.
We have a question here from Mikiki Uman. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. I apologize if not. Aren't there different interpretations of Genesis, for example, with some viewing it as literal history, others as symbolic or allegorical, and still others as a combination of both? Your thoughts? We have about 5 more minutes or so.
Okay. Is the audio okay? Could you guys hear me
Yes.
all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for that question. And I would say, to answer that question, you should look at what Jesus said about the Genesis account. And in Matthew chapter 19, he quotes from the Genesis account of the creation of Adam and Eve. And Jesus says of Adam and Eve, "Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female?" And then he goes on to expound on that. But Jesus believed in a literal Adam and Eve that were made. They were created by God. They didn't evolve from a lower life form. And he believed that they were made by God at the beginning of his creation. And when you read the creation account, man is created on the 6th day of creation. So Jesus believed that man was made by God and made at the beginning of God's creation on the 6th day. So Jesus did not believe that man evolved from a lower life form, and Jesus did not believe that man came into existence billions of years after life first appeared on the earth. So Jesus took Genesis literally and believed there was a literal Adam and Eve that were the first man. And so if I disagree with that, well, then I'm disagreeing with Jesus, and I have a different view of the Bible than Jesus Christ. And I would say Jesus knows better than me. Either Jesus is right, or the person who says that man evolved and that life existed for billions of years before man came into existence. Either Jesus is right or that person is right. And I'm going to side with Jesus on that.
He responds, he says, I'm not asking what Jesus said. I'm asking what evidence is there. And do you respond to the question asked?
Well, I think that you can't disregard what Jesus said. What did Jesus say? What did the apostles think? What did the early church think? Jesus is the Son of God. So I think that holds the most weight of anything. There's certainly DNA evidence and other things as well. Even with, just something that comes to mind, like the flood narrative. Like every major civilization in the world has a flood narrative. It doesn't match exactly the same as what is in Genesis, but you go to South America, you go to Asia, you go to Africa, you go to parts of Europe, you go to North America. Every civilization has a story of God judging the world with a global flood and a family surviving that. So, and they're on different continents, but they all have this common story. So there are lots of things like that point to the literal historical record of Genesis.
Thank you. I guess we're, anything else you want to say we got another minute or so?
I would say if you have the opportunity to go to Israel, you should go. It'll change your life. It'll change the way that you read the Bible. It'll greatly, deeply impact you spiritually as well.
You have just experienced another episode of the Mischief Maker broadcast. Hit the subscribe button. Connect at chiefmischiefmaker.com. Thanks for coming along for the ride. And hopefully, you are now a bit closer to becoming a mischief maker in your part of the world.